Zelensky says he's had very constructive and positive conversations with President Trump about the resumption of military aid to Kyiv. This includes the purchase of Patriot missile air defence systems, which Ukraine says it urgently needs to protect itself from intensifying Russian attacks. The US supply of weapons to Ukraine has dropped significantly and at times has simply stopped after President Trump returned to the White House. So how vital are those Patriot missiles? I spoke to the retired US Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis.
They're actually not important at all in terms of whether it's going to have any impact on the war. I mean, you can just see already that what they've been having, and we're talking like really since 2023, they just haven't made any impact on anything. And whether there's a big spurge, a big surge of them, et cetera, it just doesn't make any difference. And you see that playing out, graphically virtually every night here in the last week or so, where Russia's accelerating how many aerial drones, missiles, Kinzhals, hypersonics, etc. And Ukraine just doesn't have enough to shoot them down, and nobody else has enough to give them to shoot them all down. So whether you get a handful more, you're not going to make any fundamental difference because Russia can swamp anything that we have. So it's going to look good on paper. It's going to make them feel better, I guess, about themselves, but it's not going to have any impact. And everybody needs to understand it will not change the nature of the air war, which is in the negative side for Ukraine.
But surely it will at least save some civilian lives?
Of course, anything that you knock down, anything you hit is gonna be one less that impacts. But that may have a reduction. That's the important thing. It may have a reduction in the amount of fire that hits the ground, but that's it. But that won't change the arc and the course of the war, which is decisively against Ukraine. You can't reverse that. And everybody, if anybody thinks that otherwise, they need to, I guess, reconsider, because the graphic evidence shows that it's not going to make any difference in the war. And if you're not going to make any difference in the war, then what's the purpose of it?
Why is that then? Is it that Russia's economy is on such a war footing that production in the US, Ukraine, Western countries simply can't keep up?
Yes, actually, to that point, the Russian production is at industrial scale, way, way above everything in the combined West, to include the United States. We can't even come close to matching the interceptor missiles for the offensive missiles and drones that the Russians are firing. But that exposes the second part, which is that the U.S. and primarily, we just don't have the industrial capacity to come close to matching what the Russians are doing offensively. And they're still ramping up, so that they probably have not seen the top. I mean, the last round that came a couple of nights ago was 700 and some odd aerial objects that were fired. And it wouldn't surprise me long if that's not the top. If we get up to 1,000 here coming up pretty short, and by all accounts, they can maintain this pace for quite some time.
Does the fact that President Zelensky is talking in more positive terms about a conversation he's had with President Trump signify, though, a change in perspective for President Trump?
Well, it does, and that's actually a problem itself, because you've seen 3 times since the Trump was inaugurated on January 20th of this year, he has suspended or paused weapons or ammunition going to Ukraine, or at least the U.S. has, because apparently there's some question about who actually authorized the pause. But it's happened 3 times, and 3 times he's gone back. And when you look, according to what Axios reported yesterday, the first batch that's been released is a whopping 10 interceptor missiles, which is enough for about 5 minutes of defense on one city. And given how many weapons are fired against, like Kiev, for example, you're not even going to be able to tell. So the bottom line is, for Trump, he's gone back on what he had. Because remember, in April, he told his Secretary of State to say, we are days away from walking if we don't get a deal between the two sides, if they don't come closer together. And then on May the 4th, he said it again on NBC News. And then all of a sudden, he stopped talking about walking away. So what is actually the American plan? I don't know that anybody knows, and that might even include Trump.
So if Patriot missiles are not the answer, what do you suggest is?
There's only one actual answer, and it's the one that nobody in the West wants to acknowledge, and that is having a negotiated settlement on draconian, ugly terms. That's the only thing that's going to end this war and preserve any more Ukrainian territory and stop the killing of Ukrainian lives, because Russia is unambiguous. They've been saying it at every level, to include a Russian speaker on my channel, my YouTube channel this morning, That he said that we'll either get a negotiated settlement on terms that we can live with, or we'll just keep fighting until we win it on the battlefield. And the problem is they have the capacity to do that. Even if it takes another year or longer, they can do it, but the Ukraine side can't defend that long. And at some point, they're going to lose everything if you don't have the draconian terms that you can choose now.
The thoughts there of the retired US Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Interesting there, essentially saying that Ukraine should sign up for a difficult peace deal now rather than a much harder one in a year or more. I suspect many in Kyiv would not agree with that view, though.